In today's video, we are talking must start and sit wide receivers for week 5. I'm going through every single matchup. We're going to talk about 28 teams, 14 matchups. At the end of this video, we will have talked about 60 total wide receivers or more for week 5, and we'll tell you if you can start or sit them. Keep in mind, we have the Browns, Chargers, Seahawks, and Bucks all on bye. No Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, Keenan Allen, Josh Palmer, Lockett, Metcalf, no Mike Evans, no Chris Godwin this week, so please keep that in mind. All right, without further ado, lots to talk about, so let's get straight into it. The first matchup we will discuss is Thursday Night Football, and even as a Commanders fan, I'm not super excited to have us on Thursday Night Football, but prime time, baby. Here we go. Bears at the Commanders. 44.5 is the over-under, and the Commanders are favored at home. When we look at the Bears side of the ball here, DJ Moore is a must-start for me in Week 5, coming off a big 27-plus point performance versus the Broncos, which was a plus matchup. He has another plus matchup versus the Commanders. Commanders have been an incredible matchup for fantasy wide receivers. Through 4 weeks, rather, they are the 4th best matchup when you look at points allowed to the position. And DJ Moore, while it's not been sexy, it's not been hot so far. Back-to-back games with a touchdown. He's a wide receiver 14 on the year and averaging over 15 PPR points. So he should be in your lineup. Yeah, it was a devastating loss, but at least that passing game got, kind of clicking a little bit between DJ and Justin Fields. As for Darnell Mooney, that is not a player that I am personally looking to start. There's been one good game from Darnell Mooney. He hasn't played over 80% of the snaps since that game. He's laid 2 goose eggs, 2 out of his 4 games, averaging just 6 points per game. I struggle to see a scenario in which you start him. If you are starting him, you must be in a very deep league, like a 20-team league or something. As for the Commander side of the ball, this is a pretty decent matchup. The Bears give up the 12th most points to the position. Terry McLaurin will be my only must-start of this wide receiver room. It's been up and it's been down for really most of this wide receiver room, but you could also put Terry in there. Through 4 weeks, Terry has been the best wide receiver in real life and for fantasy purposes. He's averaging 13.6 points per game. And I think we have to remember that Terry was coming back from that turf toe injury, so he's really only starting to get his explosion back. We could have, a good run of games for Terry McLaurin as he and Sam Howell get on the same page. He's averaging 13.5 points per game. In week 1, he saw just 4 targets, but since then, he's averaging 7.3 targets per game and over 16 PPR points. As for the other two, Jahan Dotson. Man, I loved Jahan Dotson coming into this offseason. I mean, I've just loved watching him both at Penn State and in his rookie season. He was a touchdown scoring machine with Carson Wentz. That's not been the case thus far. It's been really, really disappointing for Jahan Dotson. Under 10 points in each of his first 3 matchups before finally getting 12.7 points last week with that last second touchdown versus the Eagles. On the year, though, only 6.2 targets per game and only averaging less than 8 points per game in PPR. He's a wide receiver 60 at the time of recording this video. With bye weeks, you might have to start him, but I think most people will have a better option. So I would likely bench him unless you just don't have a clear better option this week. And the same goes for Curtis Samuel. Part of the reason, though, that Jahan Dotson hasn't had a breakout or hasn't been great is because this team is still using Curtis Samuel. Samuel's coming off 8 targets last week versus the Eagles. He had a touchdown on the rush. And through 4 weeks, he's averaging 5 targets per game. So unfortunately, Curtis Samuel is kind of wiping out Jahan Dotson for fantasy and also hurting Terry McLaurin's upside as well. If it was only Dotson and McLaurin, these guys would be more reliable. But regardless, I am not starting Curtis or Jahan Dotson if I can help it. Okay, next we will move on to the London game. This is the first game that we have on Sunday. What do you guys think of the London game? I was watching it and I was seeing all over Twitter people being upset about the Toy Story experience. And I'm thinking to myself, you're not the target audience. Like, I'm sure kids loved watching Toy Story. Football, maybe I'm wrong. Let me know. What do you guys think of the London game and the Toy Story thing they did last week? But Jaguars at Bills, it's actually in London. The over-under is 48 points, and the Bills are favored in London town. Jags. Let's look at that side of the ball first. Calvin Ridley, I'm still putting as a must start. Okay, it's been disappointing since week 1. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it hasn't. In 2 of 3 games, he's been under 10 PPR points. This team hasn't been on the same page. Ridley's dropped a couple balls. He and Trevor haven't been on the same page at all moments. Last week versus the Falcons, he did score the touchdown early on, but he was shadowed by AJ Terrell for most of that matchup. So you have to anticipate that with the talent that he's got and the fact that he won't be shadowed by Terrell every single game, that he will bounce back. I am still starting him personally. I would also put Christian Kirk in the must start category. Since week 2, he has been the wide receiver to own. However, this team does still plan on using Zay Jones and Ridley exclusively in 2 wide receiver sets. So he remains a must start. But I will say, if Zay Jones somehow suits up for this game, I would lower my expectations for Christian Kirk. I don't imagine him seeing anywhere over 10 targets. You know, in week 2, he had a 14. In week 4, he had 12. I don't think you see that sort of performance for him if Zay Jones is out there, because we won't probably see him on too many 2 wide receiver sets. But as for Zay Jones, I just don't think you can start him right now. A player who was averaging 6.5 targets when healthy, but, you know, without seeing him on the field, I think most people are going to have a better option. For the Bills side of the ball, you're starting Stephon Diggs. I don't want to waste time on superstars, just so we're on the same page, guys. If there's a superstar in today's video, I'm going to say you got to start your stars. That's what we're going to say here for Stephon Diggs, coming off a 3-touchdown game. So let's talk about the nitty-gritty, which really would be Gabe Davis. Now, I think some people might be upset that I've labeled Gabe Davis as a risky start, because he has been fine. He's a wide receiver 28 on the year, but we are talking about a player, and I just want you to hear me out, okay? We are talking about a player who is not thriving off of volume, but big plays, a couple big plays a game, okay? We're talking about a guy who's averaging 4.5 targets per game. Remember how we just talked about how Jahan Dotson and Curtis Samuel are canceling each other out? Both of those guys are averaging much more than 4.5 targets per game. Right now, Gabe Davis is averaging less targets per game than Josh Reynolds, Jaden Reed, and Tyler Boyd. 4.5 targets per game is nowhere near top 50 amongst wide receivers. What's been saving him is the touchdowns. He's had a touchdown in all 3 of his last games. 35% of his fantasy points have come from touchdowns alone. Now, I understand he's on a team where he only needs a couple targets to return a good fantasy day, but I can't put him in the must-start category because there is still risk. Gabe Davis is still a boom-bust player. In week 1, he had 4 targets, and it was a terrible game. Then in week 2, he puts up 21 points. The next 2 games combined, week 3 and 4, averaging 3.5 targets per game. He just happened to get into the end zone. So if he's not getting into the end zone, he's likely not a good play. So a lot of you might have to start him. He might be your best option, but I cannot, in good health and good conscience, go ahead and put him in the must-start category. All right, the third matchup we're going to look at is the Texans at the Falcons. This is the start of the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard slate. 41.5 is the over-under here, and the Falcons are favored. Let's make this easy. Nico Collins is a must-start. Wide receiver 7 on the year. 20.7 PPR points per game. The breakout is here. He and CJ Stroud are on the same page. Tank Dell is a risky start, but for example, between Tank Dell and Gabe Davis, I feel better about starting Tank Dell because I know he is a crucial part of the offense. He's going to be targeted on a high percentage of his snaps. A little bit inconsistent. Only 3 targets last week, which is a little bit concerning, but I would start him in a 12-man league in my flex spot, but we're not starting Robert Woods, Bobby Trees. As for the Falcons, you know, this isn't a great matchup for either side. This is a bottom, what would it be? Quick maths in my head. This is a bottom 6 or 7 matchup for wide receivers on both sides of the ball. Both of these teams have been pretty good against wide receivers. For the Falcons, most teams are dominating the Texans on the ground. They're not attacking this team through the air. So I struggle to start Drake London for multiple reasons, but one of those reasons being he's already been inconsistent. 2 of 3 games he's had under 6 PPR points, and if he's not finding the end zone, he's almost like a worse version of Drake London. Honestly, he's like a worse version of Drake London. If he's not getting a touchdown, he's probably giving you a poor performance. How can you start Drake London when you've got Desmond Ridder throwing him the ball? I just don't see it. All right, the fourth matchup that we're going to be looking at today is Panthers at Lions. This is a 45 over under 45 points, and the Lions are the favorites. It's been rough for the Panthers. However, when we look at this matchup, the Lions are middle of the pack against wide receivers, and you got a guy in Adam Thielen who has been playing his ass off. He's a must start for me. Wide receiver 10 on the year. He's getting so many targets. From week 2 onwards, Adam Thielen is averaging over 10 targets per game. That is in the elite category. And in weeks 2 and in week 4, we saw him put up good performances with Bryce Young. Bryce Young will be the quarterback. In those 2 games, he averaged 17.8 PPR points, including a 20-point performance versus a good Saints defense in week 2. So I'm going to put Adam Thielen as a must start. Now, I know that DJ Chark and Terrace Marshall have both been targeted pretty often, but these aren't guys that I'm personally going to be adding to my lineup. Neither would I add Jonathan Mingo. I do believe that if Mingo joins this wide receiver room, it could make things a little bit more messy. But man, that wide receiver room outside of Adam Thielen is not something I really want to chase. And for the other side of the ball, we're going to make this really simple. Again, start your stars. Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver 11 on the year. And if you think about it, he hasn't really been all that necessary for this offense in some of their blowout games. I mean, last week they blew out the Packers. The score didn't end that way, but we all watched the game. They were dominating the game and they relied on the run. What do you guys think this game script looks like? When I think about this game, I think we could see something similar for these Lions. They could dominate the ground against a poor Panthers team. Amon-Ra, again, start your stars, averaging 8.8 targets per game. He's always a must start. But outside of Amon-Ra, I'm excited to see Jameson Williams back. As a Jameson Williams guy, I'm excited to see my guy on the field. But I don't have any confidence to start him right now, especially not in a matchup where I would imagine the game script gets away from the Panthers, meaning the Lions can kind of run the ball out. So yeah, I'm not starting Jameson, and I think Jameson makes Josh Reynolds a guy that you should not be starting either. Okay, we'll go on to the fifth matchup of the week. That is Titans at Colts. Over-under is 42.5. It's one of the lower over-unders this week. And get this, as of right now, according to VegasInsiders.com, FanDuel, all these sites, the Colts are the favorites. I get it. They've been playing good football. Anthony Richardson's been up, he's been down, he's been a little inconsistent. For fantasy, he's been great, but for real football, he's been a little up and down. But the Colts are favored. Get that. This is a great matchup for wide receivers. The Colts and the Titans are both tied for giving up the 7th most points to wide receivers in fantasy football. However, we'll start with the Titans here. I can't, in good conscience, make DeAndre Hopkins a must start this week. Okay? Let's talk about that. Hopkins was targeted 13 times in week 1, but since then hasn't demanded anywhere near that target share. From weeks 2 to 4, he's averaging 6 targets per game and 8.7 PPR points per game. Here are his fantasy finishes by week in 2023, okay? The wide receiver 26 in week 1, the wide receiver 62 in week 2, 61 in week 3, and the wide receiver 38 in week 4. This guy has not been helping anyone win their weeks. So some people will have better options, on an offense that is not throwing the ball much. Yeah, I can't make him a must start. And as for Treylon Burks, I don't understand the lack of usage. This is a talented player that I really liked coming out of Arkansas. I cannot for the life of me understand how little they're using him. Coming off an injury, you can't start him. You can't start Westbrook-Ikhine. You just can't start those guys. And then on the other side, my only must start is Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman is a wide receiver 19 on the year. In week 1, he started off hot. He was the wide receiver 8 that week, and it looked like, he was going to be an absolute stud. Since then, he's kind of come back down to earth. From weeks 2 to 4, his wide receiver finishes have been wide receiver 38, wide receiver 22, and most recently, wide receiver 76 in week 4. I have to admit, I was out on Michael Pittman heading into the year this year, and week 3 and 4 has only made me more confused about where I stand with him. We're coming off a game versus the Rams in week 4 where this team went to overtime. They needed to pass the ball. and Michael Pittman only had 5 targets. And he's getting those targets from an inaccurate Anthony Richardson. Regardless, if you have him, I think you have to start him. But it's really confusing over there. Again, I just struggle to see more better options for people. But as for Alec Pierce and Josh Downs, I know someone commented on Badaki's video last week when he did this video and said, Josh Downs is a must start. You got to have him out there. Not with Anthony Richardson. 3 targets last week. You can't have this guy in your lineup until he shows us more. The 6th matchup that we have is the Giants at the Dolphins. 49.5 over under. The Dolphins are favored, of course, after what we saw Monday night. Tied for the second highest over under of the week. And what does that tell you guys, okay? Vegas is smart. They know what they're doing with their predictions. That doesn't tell me that the Giants are going to go off. To me, this sounds like a slaughterhouse for the Dolphins over the Giants, okay? So let's talk about the Dolphins side of the ball then. Tyreek Hill's a must start. You start your stars, okay? He's currently on pace for 1,997 yards. 3 yards away from 2K is his current pace. As for Jalen Waddle, I'm going to go ahead and say this is a bounce back week for Jalen Waddle. This is a get right game. He needs to be in your lineup. I know it's been disappointing, but last week he had a touchdown. He caught a touchdown and it was called back due to a penalty. So this is someone that should be in your lineup. I know the team wants him to get right. He wants to get right. And Vegas is telling us there's a lot of points going to be scored from this game, and it's not going to be coming from the Giants side of the ball. Speaking of the Giants side of the ball, who the hell can you start? Honestly, who should I tell you to start? I can't tell you to start anyone. Now, the only player I want to highlight is Wan'Dale Robinson. 5.5 targets per game since coming back. This is the only wide receiver I'm even remotely interested in, okay? He's probably not starting in any of my 12-man leagues, but in a 14-man or a 16-man league, you might consider him. More specifically, in a DFS situation, I might consider having Wan'Dale Robinson be a part of a DFS as kind of a Hail Mary, if you will. But overall, I don't really want to start any Giants wide receivers because how can you trust this offensive line to even allow Daniel Jones to have the ball for more than 3 seconds, for more than a second and a half at a time? I mean, this offensive line looks like the worst offensive line in the NFL right now. So, yeah, I can't personally start any Giants wide receivers, but Tyreek and Waddle are locks for my lineup. Okay, the 7th matchup we'll look at is the Saints at Patriots. 39.5 over under. Patriots are favored. This is the second lowest over under of the week. In my opinion, this should be the lowest over under of the week. I'm not really excited to watch this game. If you're a Saints or Patriots fan, don't hate me, but maybe you could even agree. This does not seem like an exciting game to go watch or to watch on TV. The Saints offense is putrid in week 4. It was so bad. And the Patriots just look awful. Ramondre doesn't look that great. Zeke looks like old Zeke. And Mac Jones is awful at playing quarterback. This just looks like an awful game for people to have to watch. But let's talk about it. For the Saints side of the ball, it's a decent matchup. Both of these defenses are kind of middle of the pack against wide receivers. Chris Olave is the only must start across this entire matchup for me. Olave had his first disappointing game here in week 4. Before that, he was averaging 17.4 PPR points in the first 3 weeks, and he hadn't even scored a touchdown yet. Now, we need to talk about Derek Carr, okay? I am really worried about Derek Carr. Clearly, he should not have been out there on Sunday. The offense didn't look good. Carr could not throw the ball downfield, which who is that going to drastically hurt? Chris Olave, the best deep threat on the team. So if Derek Carr wants to go out there and try and play again, I would really limit my expectations. I do not expect Derek Carr to be able to get the ball down the field to Chris Olave. I mean, I wonder why Alvin Kamara had 14 targets in his return. That had more to do with the fact that Derek Carr couldn't throw the ball more than 5 yards than it did with them just being obsessed with Kamara. So I hope Jameis Winston is playing for Chris Olave's sake. Regardless, you have to start this guy, but lower your expectations if it's Derek Carr. But that is the only guy I feel confident starting. As for Michael Thomas, he's less impacted, but he also just doesn't have any true upside. Wide receiver 42 on the year, hovering around 10 points per game. This is just not an explosive player. He's just a if you want 9 to 10 to 11 points in your lineup, that's what you're looking for there. And then Rashid Shaheed has also been drastically impacted by Derek Carr's injury. That's just not a guy that I think we can currently start. For the Patriots side of the ball, I don't think that we have a single must-start player. You can't start Juju. He's been poor and quarterback play has been awful. You can't start Kendrick Bourne. And I just don't see a way that you start Devontae Parker, who has one game over 10 points. The rest of them are under 6. I don't see a scenario in which you can start those guys. So I'm not excited to watch this game. This is if I had to have a segment, the most boring game of the week, this would be it. And I'm sorry to anyone who's fans of those teams. But this moves us to the actual lowest over-under of the week. Number 8, the 8th matchup, Ravens at the Pittsburgh Steelers. 38.5 points is the total over-under by Vegas. And I think that has a lot to do with Kenny Pickett's injury. But the only player I'm going to label as a must-start in this matchup is Zay Flowers. Unquestionably, it's been up, it's been down for Zay in 2023. However, he's still averaging 7.3 targets per game, and this is an incredible matchup. The Steelers are the 3rd best matchup for fantasy wide receivers when you look at points allowed to the position, and there is no Rashad Bateman, or we don't know, right? We don't know, but Rashad Bateman and OBJ have been dealing with injuries. Zay Flowers is going to be locked into my lineup this week. However, I can't start another Ravens wide receiver. As for the Steelers, I want to make George Pickens a must start, but I just can't. He's a risky start. It really depends on your options. It depends on how big your league is, how many starters you have. He's shown some real promise during this season, but Kenny Pickett has been god awful in the last 2 weeks, and I don't think Mitch Trubisky is going to be all that better. Keep in mind, last year, Mitch Trubisky was starting for this team to begin the season, and he did not favor George Pickens whatsoever in games. So George Pickens, a player that I really love. I love his talent. But, coming off a game where he had less than 5 points, now we're going to play the Ravens versus their secondary, which is susceptible, but it's Trubisky likely out there. Maybe it's Kenny. It's not a matchup I really want to chase. And then Calvin Austin and Allen Robinson, I just don't see a scenario in which those guys are going to return a start. So I'll probably be sitting those guys. The 9th matchup we'll look at here is the Bengals at the Cardinals. This is the start of the afternoon games on Sunday. 44.5 points is the over-under, and the Bengals are favored. 2 teams that are 1-3. One team we expected to be 1-3, the Cardinals, who, oddly enough, you could make a case that they're playing better than the Bengals. And you got the Bengals who are playing awful. Joe Burrow looks terrible. He has no mobility. He can't get out of the pocket. Teams are just, sending the house on him. The only must starts in this game for me is Jamar Chase and Hollywood Brown. As far as Jamar Chase goes, little bit of tension in the locker room right now. He had that quote on Sunday, "I'm open. I'm always effing open." Like, was that a statement to Joey B? I don't know, but the relationship's a little bit on the rocks right now. This team is really struggling. Chase has been disappointing, unquestionably, okay? But I think that has more to do with Joe Burrow than it does Chase. Regardless, he's still averaging over 10 targets per game. I cannot sit a player who's averaging 10 targets per game, a guy who on any given week can finish as the wide receiver 1 on the week. For me personally, that's just not a player that I can afford to sit. As for T. Higgins, I think I'm going to be leaning towards sitting him this week. Now, it really depends on what your options are. If I knew that T. Higgins and Joe Burrow were both fully healthy, they would be must-starts every week. But Joe Burrow's not healthy. T. Higgins is clearly not healthy with the rib injury. Most people will probably have a better option this week, and Tyler Boyd is just not a guy I feel comfortable starting. Maybe in a DFS lineup if T. Higgins is out. For the other side of the ball, Hollywood Brown is the other must start here. Hollywood Brown has been great. How crazy is that? Hollywood Brown has been great, averaging 8 targets per game this year. Josh Dobbs has been playing really well. No interceptions so far. He's been running a very good offense. In the last 3 weeks, Hollywood Brown has been over 16.5 PPR points in every matchup. Get this, including versus the Dallas defense and the Niners defense. I don't see how you sit Hollywood Brown. He might disappoint, but he's got to be in your lineups. He's already proven it versus some of the best defenses in the NFL. As for Michael Wilson, he is in the risky start category for me. My number one pickup of the week. I love Michael Wilson. Talked about him so much on our Dynasty channel this offseason. However, I'm playing the wait and see approach. I want to see that he's going to be an important part of this offense week in and week out, not just a flash game. But those are the only guys that you could consider in that matchup. All right, the 10th matchup of the week is the Eagles at the Rams, 49.5 over under. Eagles are favored. This is the second highest over under of the week, and it makes sense because I think we should see a lot of fantasy points from this game. We have to recognize that A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith will both have boom and bust games in this offense. The good news is Dallas Goedert is really not involved, so these guys both remain strong must starts. Wide receiver 8 on the year for A.J. Brown, wide receiver 12 on the year for Devonta Smith. These guys are locked into your lineups regardless of what happens on a given week. As for the Rams, now the Rams actually have a good matchup. The Eagles have given up the 5th most points to wide receivers in fantasy so far. Puka Nacua, whether Cooper Kupp is out there or not, he is a lock into your lineup. Wide receiver 4 on the year. You can't sit this budding star. As for Cooper Kupp, if he's back, he is going straight into your lineup. You do not sit Cooper Kupp. Tutu Atwell, on the other hand, I put as a risky start. Here's how you play Tutu Atwell, in my opinion, this week, okay? In a 12-man league, all right? If Cooper Kupp plays, I think you got to sit him. I think you have to, okay? If Cooper Kupp does not play, I think you can roll Tutu out there. There hasn't been a single game this year where he's had less than 8 targets. In fact, in the last 3 weeks, he's had 9 targets in every single game. So in a matchup that should see a lot of points, according to Vegas, if Kupp is not out there, you can start Tutu Atwell. All right, the 11th matchup that we will look at today is Jets at Broncos, 43.5 over under, with the Broncos favored. 2 teams not playing their best, and someone's got to win this matchup. Someone has to win. As for the Jets, okay, I feel a lot more confident starting Garrett Wilson this week than I did last week. 14 targets. We're coming off a 14-target game. They are going to force feed Garrett Wilson. Zach Wilson is playing better. We all would agree with that. And this matchup is a smash matchup, for wide receivers all year long. The Broncos, 6th best matchup for wide receivers this year. Wilson should be locked into your lineups in week 5. As for Allen Lazard, I just personally don't see a scenario where you can feel comfortable starting him. And as for the Broncos side of the ball, this is not a good matchup, okay? This, in fact, is the 3rd worst matchup for fantasy wide receivers this year. I don't really want to chase Courtland Sutton. He has exceeded expectations, but if Sauce Gardner's on Courtland Sutton, I don't think he's having a good game. So proceed with caution. And as for Jerry Jeudy, it's been pretty disappointing. I think he's the most talented guy on this team at the wide receiver spot, but I don't think I can start him. And the same goes for Marvin Mims, but more because there's just no volume for Marvin Mims just yet. All right, and that brings us to the Sunday night football matchup. We have the Chiefs at the Vikings. There is a 52.5 over under. This is the highest over under of the week. So Vegas is telling us the most fantasy points will come from this matchup right here. The Chiefs are currently favored in that over under. Now, the Vikings are the best matchup for wide receivers in fantasy football so far this year. However, how can I tell you to start a single Chiefs wide receiver? Honestly, Sky Moore has had 1 good game this year. And that was off of a broken play for a touchdown. He's not being heavily targeted. Tony hasn't played over 30% of his snaps. And Rashee Rice is exciting, but he's barely out there as well. And he's not getting enough targets to play him. So as good as this matchup is, you're really throwing up a Hail Mary if you start one of these guys. And I don't know how to tell you to do that. Now, as for the Vikings side of the ball, okay, Justin Jefferson to start. You have to start Justin Jefferson. You don't need me to tell you that. For Jordan Addison, he's a must start this week for me. And I understand there could be some people who have a big problem with that. Are you kidding me? Jordan Addison had 1 target last week and you're telling me he's a must start? Hang in there with me for a second, okay? Last week was a strange game for the Vikings, all right? They barely ran any 3 wide receiver sets. They ran the ball a ton. I think they knew they were going to win that game versus the Panthers even when they were down. Addison only saw 1 target. Meanwhile, in the first 3 weeks, he's averaging 6.3 targets per game. However, I believe they will need to be in a lot of 3 wide receiver sets in this matchup in particular, and I think Addison is going to be necessary for them to have a chance at winning this game. Think about the game for a second, okay? Just hang in there with me. The Chiefs are a great run defense. I don't think you're going to be able to run on them. The Chiefs will also be able to put up points on this mediocre Vikings defense, meaning the Vikings are likely to be playing from behind for a lot of this game. I know it's risky, but the Vikings, in my opinion, will be in a game script that's going to force them to throw the ball. They were, top 3 in passing attempts per game before this week, and Jordan Addison is going to return value. Now, of course, you're not starting Jordan Addison over Puka Nacua, over Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? However, this week, if I look at my rankings, Jordan Addison, where do I have Jordan Addison ranked? He is ranked as a top 30 option, okay? And I feel comfortable with putting him out there. For example, I don't have Tyler Lockett this week because of a bye week, okay? So I can either look towards the waiver wire or I can start Jordan Addison. In that scenario, I'm putting Jordan Addison as a must start. A lot of you guys out there who have him will need a flex this week, and Addison can be a fine replacement. As for KJ Osborne, he's a must sit. The dude saw 83% of the targets and only had 83% of the snaps and only got targeted twice. You cannot start him. All right, we have the Sunday night football matchup now. Cowboys at 49ers. It's a 45-point over-under, and the 49ers are favored at home. This should be a great matchup, and I'm excited that they put it on prime time. It's really difficult, I'll be honest with you guys, to take any information from the Dallas Cowboys this year and determine their wide receiver room's viability to start this week. Like, it really is. Think about this. In week 1, the Cowboys blow out the Giants. Don't need their wide receivers. In week 2, they blow out the Jets. Don't need their wide receivers. In week 3, they get upset by the Cards. They needed their wide receivers. They didn't come through. In week 4, they blow out the Patriots. Didn't need their wide receivers. I mean, CeeDee Lamb is averaging 74% of the snaps so far. He's not been needed. I believe this is the first game we will finally see what the Cowboys will need to do in neutral game scripts. Okay? That means CeeDee Lamb is a must start. He's a must start regardless every single week, but he is a must start this week. I know it's been disappointing, but I am absolutely putting him out there for me. And Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup, I'm listing as risky starts. I think Jordan Addison's a better start than these guys, for example, but some of you guys in deeper leagues, maybe they are a fine option. I personally don't think you want to start them, but it depends on how deep your leagues are. Both of them won't succeed, but one of them might have a fine game. As for the 49ers side of the ball, Brandon Ayuk is a must start as well as Deebo Samuel. For Ayuk, he has only been healthy in week 1 and 2. He's played full games in those 2 weeks. And in those 2 games, he's averaging 7 receptions for 139 yards and 1 touchdown per game. 27 PPR points. You have to start Brandon Ayuk. He's a superstar. As for Deebo, was he healthy last week? I don't know. He played 87% of the snaps. I am someone who brought Deebo as a sell high before the year. And when Brandon Ayuk was out, I had people commenting, telling me, this didn't age well. What are you talking about? You have no idea what you're doing. But the concern was always when Deebo's healthy, Ayuk is healthy, Kittle and CMC, when everyone's there, Deebo in splits last year was not an incredible asset. He was just a completely mid asset. Regardless, Deebo is a must start in every format. They're going to need all their guys versus the Cowboys this week, and Deebo should bounce back. He absolutely will not have under 10 points, in my opinion. And the last matchup we're looking at this week is Monday Night Football. We've got the Packers at the Raiders. This should be a good game. 44.5 points is the over-under, and the Packers are favored away. Here's how I look at this. For the Packers, you can start Watson and you can start Dobbs. Watson only played 46% of the snaps last week. He was on a snap count, but he remains their red zone threat. He scored a touchdown, and it's a good matchup. The Raiders are the 11th best matchup for wide receivers. Romeo Dobbs, on the other hand, we heard about the connection with Jordan Love throughout camp, and it's showing. Since he's been healthy from week 3 onwards, he's averaging 12.5 targets per game. You got to put that guy into your lineup unless you have clear, better options because he's dominating target share. As for the Raiders side of the ball, 2 guys who are, again, must starts. Devontae Adams is a superstar. You don't need me to tell you to start him. As for Jacoby Myers, with Jimmy G, which Jimmy should be back this week, Jacoby Myers has been, dare I say, elite? He's been damn near elite. With Jimmy G, he's averaging 11 targets per game and over 22 PPR points per game. Jimmy has his guys. It's Adams, it's Myers, and it's Josh Jacobs. Those are the only 3 guys that are relevant in Las Vegas, and those are the only 3 guys who are really getting opportunities. You got to start Jacoby Myers if you have him, and there's no better options there, right? Okay, so that is it for today, guys. Man, my throat is killing me. We have just gone through over 60 wide receivers every matchup. Do me a massive favor. Can you please smash that like button? These videos that we're doing for you guys, the new format, it takes probably 4 times as long as what we used to do, but we're doing them for you guys because they were highly requested and you really enjoyed when we did them last week. So do us a favor, just in return, can you drop a like to show that you do love it? If you want some rankings from us, weekly rankings that are consistently updated, if you want direct advice in a DM, then go ahead and sign up with our promo code LAND at the Flock Fantasy website. DM us when you do, we'll get you all hooked up. Outside of that, good luck this week. Go get a W, and we'll see you very soon. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.